The Loneliness Trap, a Zen story to help you feel connected again. Right now, there is a hollow, ringing ache located precisely behind your earlobes, extending down the sides of your throat. It is a physical sensation of deep, systemic isolation, a cold weight that makes your jaw tighten as you hold your breath against the quiet of your room. You feel as though a thick, invisible glass wall separates your inner vulnerability from the rest of humanity, leaving you entirely stranded within your own mind. Tonight, your self-reliance has turned into a heavy suit of armor, an exhausting posture of hyper-independence, where you refuse to seek comfort because you believe nobody could truly comprehend the depth of your struggle. You are lying awake, trapped in a silent exile of your own making, treating your loneliness as a permanent flaw in your capacity to belong. The atmosphere around you carries a deep, insulating stillness, a cool density that feels completely disconnected from the frantic noise of the daytime world. The air is perfectly calm, holding a faint, earthy crispness that helps to muffle the distant, fading rhythms of the neighborhood outside. Your mattress serves as a solid, unyielding foundation beneath your tired frame, accepting your total physical weight without asking you to bridge the distance to another soul. Tonight, there are no social scripts to perform within this dim space, and no expectations are being placed upon your vulnerability while you rest. Your arms can lie loosely by your sides, completely relieved of the constant defensive labor of holding your boundaries intact against the world. You are not an isolated fragment left behind by the rest of the world, and this profound sense of disconnection is not a sign that your spirit is permanently broken. It is simply a sensitive mind trying its best to guard you from the sting of rejection by building a quiet, solitary fortress within your chest. Tonight, there is absolutely no need to force yourself to feel connected, and we are not going to demand that you tear down your defensive walls to prove you are healing. We are only going to sit together in this deep, sheltered space, allowing the hollow ache behind your throat to widen out into the darkness without requiring a single bridge to be built. There is a strange, compelling paradox in the way our internal isolation operates when we feel completely disconnected from those around us. The mind assumes that the wide, silent space between ourselves and others is a dangerous, lonely void, an empty desert that proves we are fundamentally cast out from the human circle. We look at the distance and we see nothing but an intimidating gulf that we must constantly fight to cross or desperately defend against. But ancient Buddhist wisdom reveals that this quiet, empty space is not a hollow prison at all. It is a vast, protective cavern of deep slate that connects us to the entire earth beneath our separate feet, an unbroken womb of silence that binds us to every other solitary heart in existence. Maybe you have felt this too, during those late hours when the house is completely quiet, but your mind is running through a list of all the ways you do not fit in. You look at your life and you feel a sharp, biting envy for the easy, effortless belonging that everyone else seems to enjoy so naturally. It is an exhausting way to carry the night, standing guard over your own loneliness, turning your quiet evening into a harsh evaluation of your social worth. You do not have to discover a perfect community during these still hours, and you do not need to dissolve the glass wall before your mind is permitted to settle into the dark. In a short while, we will travel down a long stone spiral staircase into a pitch-black, silent cavern chamber directly beneath an ancient mountain temple, where an old wall mason shows us how a stone chalice holds its water. But before we journey into that cool, subterranean sanctuary, let your physical body fully accept the safety of this immediate environment. You are resting in a quiet chamber where nobody is measuring your social capacity, and nobody is judging your independence as a failure. The loud demands of the sun cannot penetrate the thick, dark architecture of this evening, leaving you entirely free to soften into the stillness without a single connection to maintain. Let your shoulder blades sink deeply into the mattress, allowing the floor beneath you to take the full, heavy burden of your self-reliance. Your breath does not need to be shaped with any sense of medical precision right now, and there is no requirement to lengthen its rhythm artificially. Just notice the cool, crisp air as it passes through your nostrils, and the slightly warmer release that leaves your chest as your body settles into the surface of the bed. Every incoming breath is a soft arrival in a space where nothing is being forced, and every outgoing breath is a quiet invitation for the ringing ache behind your ears to expand, widening out into the wider gravity of your resting frame. What if the true belonging you have been fighting for is not a specialized entry into an exclusive circle that you must constantly strive to earn? What if the peace you want is already present, waiting just beneath the frantic, protective walls you have built to shelter your sensitive heart? Tonight there are no social steps to take, no conversations to repair, and no pressure to dissolve your isolation in a single hour. The vast, dark spaces of your spirit can remain completely unmapped. The silence can hold you without demanding a single answer. And you can allow the quiet stone basin of your heart to simply find its own level in the cool winter night. The awareness begins to drift away from the immediate room, descending a long, slow path that leaves the surface world behind, finding its way down an ancient stone spiral staircase chiseled into the very core of the mountain. Step by step, the air becomes noticeably cooler, holding a deep, timeless quality that remains completely untouched by the changing seasons above. At the bottom of the steps lies a massive, pitch-black cavern chamber directly beneath the foundation of a mountain temple. The atmosphere here smells intensely of damp limestone, ancient granite, and the pristine, mineral sharpness of underground water. This is a subterranean sanctuary where the silence is so heavy it feels physical, a hidden architecture of smooth slate and dark stone that has been shielded from the sun for 10,000 years. Working within the shadows of this immense vault was a young monk named Ryun. Ryun had spent many months carrying a sharp, ringing ache inside his throat, a painful sensation of absolute exile that made him feel entirely separated from the rest of his monastic community. He believed he possessed a fundamental flaw in his capacity to connect with others, convinced that a thick, invisible barrier kept him permanently cut off from the warmth of human companionship. To protect his sensitive spirit from the constant, exhausting sting of feeling out of place, he had retreated into the dark foundations of the temple. He threw himself into a solitary project, attempting to construct a freestanding stone pillar made of heavy, polished granite blocks, completely isolated from the surrounding cavern walls. To guide his labor in the deep gloom, Run utilized a small hand-forged iron plumb bob suspended by a thin flaxen string. This dark, heavy metal weight hung perfectly still in the dead air, its pointed tip hovering just a fraction of an inch above the cold stone floor, serving as an absolute anchor of vertical alignment. Run spent hours staring at the iron weight under the dim glow of a single tallow candle, adjusting his granite blocks with meticulous, defensive precision. He wanted his pillar to stand entirely straight, perfectly balanced on its own narrow base, completely detached from the mountain, believing that true strength meant achieving an independent perfection that needed no support from the terrain. On this quiet evening, as the heavy silence of the cave seemed to press against his temples, Ryun hoisted a massive, unyielding granite block to form the final tier of his isolated tower. He used his iron plumb bob to check the alignment, making sure the string ran perfectly true down the side of the stone, ensuring that not a single edge touched the limestone walls of the cavern. But the moment he released the weight of the block, a loud, fracturing crack echoed through the pitch-black vault. Under the intense, unmitigated pressure of its own isolated mass, the narrow granite pillar split near the center, sending heavy shards of stone crashing down onto the wet gravel floor, barely missing his feet. Ryun fell back against a damp limestone shelf, his palms scraped, his chest heaving with a deep, suffocating sense of failure as he stared at the ruined heap. He felt a hot surge of humiliation rising behind his throat, interpreting the collapse as a definitive proof that he was incapable of building a secure place for himself. Even in the dark, he sat in the cold slush of the cavern floor, his shoulders trembling, completely overwhelmed by the crushing weight of his own self-reliance. Master Kanto, an elderly temple builder and wall mason who spent his years maintaining the deep subterranean foundations, did not call out from the darkness, and he did not rush to clear the broken stone. His heavy boots made a slow, rhythmic crunching sound in the gravel as he approached from the far side of the chamber, his movements carrying the unhurried stability of the bedrock itself. He stood before the ruined pillar, his face completely neutral as the dim candle flame caught the deep lines of his weathered skin. He reached out with his rough, calloused hand, gently taking the iron plumb bob from Yun's trembling fingers, letting the heavy metal weight hang between them in the absolute still air. He did not offer an immediate lecture on architecture, and he did not help Ryun lift the fallen granite chunks. He simply held the flaxen string steady, letting the iron point hover over a deep natural fissure in the bedrock, and asked Ryun what the iron weight relies upon to find its perfect vertical line. Ryun looked at the dark metal, his breath catching in his throat, whispering that the plumb bob only finds its stillness because it yields completely to the immense, invisible pull of the entire earth beneath the floor. The old wall mason nodded slowly, his thumb tracing the rough, forged surface of the iron weight without a single hint of tension. He remarked that the iron bob does not achieve its straight line by fighting to separate itself from the mountain, or by pretending it stands entirely alone in the dark. It finds its absolute alignment precisely because it is deeply, continuously connected to the massive core of the earth, an unbroken gravity that holds every mountain and every valley in a single embrace. Kanto explained that Ryun's granite pillar had shattered because the young man was demanding that a narrow column bear its own immense weight in total isolation, rather than allowing its base to widen out into the ancient bedrock of the cave. He then turned and walked into the deeper shadows of the vault, leaving the young man alone with the hanging iron weight and the immense, protective silence of the limestone ceiling. The cool moisture of the underground air settled against Ryun's skin, leaving a damp film on his forearms as he sat perfectly still beside the broken column. He remained on the gravel for a long time, his eyes fixed on the small iron plumb bob as it hung completely motionless in the center of the dark vault. A quiet, heavy realization began to filter through the hollow ache down the sides of his throat, a feeling that felt as grounding and spacious as the vast cavern network itself. He saw, with sudden clarity, that his frantic attempts to build an entirely separate monument were not a sign of true independence, but the result of his terror of being rejected by the world above. He had been treating his own mind like an isolated pillar that had to carry its entire emotional burden through sheer defensive willpower, bracing his spirit against the risk of needing support. Looking at how the simple iron weight achieved its perfect stillness by yielding to an invisible, universal connection, he began to see that his isolation was an illusion built by his own rigid walls. The collapse of his structure was no longer an absolute disaster to be mourned with shame, but an invitation to let his foundation widen into the dark earth. This shifting of your alignment away from the brittle pillar is not a demand that you freeze your emotional core, or turn yourself into an unfeeling sheet of slate that feels nothing when left out in the cold. It is not an invitation to become entirely numb to the genuine pain of being misunderstood or left behind by the people you hoped would understand you. The deep insights of Buddhist wisdom point toward a much softer, gentler realization about the way we carry our internal displacement. When we look closely at our chronic internal exile, we discover that the true exhaustion does not come from the simple fact that a relationship faded or an environment felt unfamiliar. The real agony deepens when the mind tries to stand completely apart, spending its precious energy building an impenetrable wall of self-reliance, demanding that the spirit survive in absolute isolation. In our everyday interactions, we often mistake a tight, defensive withdrawal for a form of necessary self-protection. We believe that if we refuse to show our vulnerability, or if we ensure that we never need anything from anyone, we can prevent our hearts from being fractured by rejection. This internal tightening is a form of deep craving, an urgent demand that the world must prove its absolute safety before we will ever allow our true nature to touch the ground. When we exist in this state of hyper-independence, we are constantly overtaxing our own emotional structure, leaving no room for the spirit to discover the silent, connecting currents that run beneath the surface of our lives. Consider how much extra friction you introduce to your tired body when you judge yourself for feeling lonely in a crowded room. The original moment of disconnection was a single, passing event, like a cold draft blowing through an upper courtyard of the temple during an ordinary afternoon. But the mind immediately panics, treating that passing shadow as a permanent sentence of exclusion that must be guarded against through absolute, rigid self-reliance. We hang the heavy iron plumb bob of our self-criticism, using it to measure all the ways we are structurally flawed or socially incapable. We layer an entirely new layer of self-inflicted shame on top of the original ache, turning a natural human longing into a heavy, breaking monument of internal grief. True mindfulness, within the quiet subterranean vaults of your consciousness, is simply the willingness to notice the exact moment your shoulders lock into that defensive armor. It is the ability to see the glass wall without using your own mind to reinforce its thickness. You recognize the hollow ache down the sides of your throat. You feel the cold weight of isolation gathering behind your ribs, but you do not allow that sensation to drag you back into the old narrative of being fundamentally broken. You become like the old wall mason, stepping back from the shattered fragments, realizing that what your spirit needs right now is not a narrower column, but a total relaxation into the underlying bedrock. This requires an immense sense of compassionate understanding, which is nothing more than the courage to meet your own profound isolation without turning it into an indictment against your character. Your deep desire to belong, to be seen clearly by another human being, is not a structural weakness, but a naturally tender reflex that simply has nowhere to safely land in this immediate moment. When you catch your mind building elaborate, solitary towers to prove you do not need anyone, you can look at that process with a completely soft, non-judgmental gaze. You can acknowledge that your internal guardian is simply trying to keep you safe from the sting of rejection, even if its rigid methods are currently grinding your spirit down to cold stone dust. The reality of our human existence is inherently connected, tied together by a vast, invisible gravity that moves through our separate lives like the deep mineral veins running through the mountain roots. This underlying unity can feel deeply intimidating to a mind that has learned to survive only through absolute self-defense. Yet it is also the very womb through which true emotional freedom enters. The heavy, lonely situations that feel so permanent and crushing tonight are actually subject to the same laws of connection as everything else beneath the sun. They only keep their isolating weight when we continuously apply the artificial pressure of our withdrawal. When we drop the rigid metrics of our self-reliance, the narrow pillars naturally lose their form, relaxing into the wider, spacious dark of the evening. Letting go does not mean you pretend the isolation never occurred, or that you automatically trust environments that have proven themselves cold to your presence. It simply means you stop using your own precious energy to maintain a separate monument of grievance in your bedroom tonight. It is the wisdom to see that you can carry a deep sensitivity for your boundaries without allowing those boundaries to become a permanent prison cell. You are giving your awareness permission to find its true alignment, not by forcing yourself to fit into an exclusive circle, but by trusting the massive supportive ground that holds every solitary heart in a single embrace. Slowly, this quiet understanding stops being a distant philosophy, and it begins to touch the immediate texture of your resting body. You start to see that the belonging you have been fighting for is not hidden at the end of a long, exhausting struggle to perfect your independence. It is found the very moment you allow your foundation to widen, stepping off the treadmill of constant self-protection, even if it is only for the duration of this single quiet night. The broken columns can remain precisely as they are, fragmented and raw, without threatening your fundamental capacity to be held by the earth. You can choose to be the vast, undisturbed cavern within which the silence rests, completely anchored by an internal peace that needs no validation from the outside world to authorize its rest. If it feels right inside your body, let us step into a quiet chamber of soft observation together. There is no need to adjust your position with any sense of sudden urgency, or to strive for a rigid ideal of perfection tonight. Simply allow your physical frame to melt into the steady support beneath you, recognizing that right now, you have absolutely no roles to perform and no maps to finalize. The day has already locked its gates. The voices of expectation have grown quiet across the distance, and the future has not yet arrived to carve its demands into your skin. Perhaps you can bring your attention to the natural, effortless movement of your lower torso. You do not need to deepen your breathing artificially, and there is no requirement to master a complex pattern of inhalation or exhalation right now. Just observe the air as it arrives, cool and nameless, and notice how it departs, carrying a small fraction of your internal friction out into the room. With each quiet release of the breath, you might invite the tiny muscles around your jaw and throat to unhook, letting the skin across your brow become loose like a smooth sheet of slate left under a soft light. As you rest here, a specific, heavy thought may drift into the center of your awareness. It might be a memory of an old interaction, a persistent worry about an unfamiliar role, or a quiet sense of frustration for not finding your footing during the afternoon. Instead of pushing that thought away with anger, and instead of diving into its story to fix it, simply note its presence. Even noticing is enough, for it shows you are no longer drowning in the churning pool of that old anxiety. You can return whenever you are ready to this simple space of observation, letting the mental pattern receive a gentle name, labeling it quietly as isolating, or defending, or guarding the tower. Now, imagine holding that small, hand-forged iron plumb bob we observed inside Master Kanto's subterranean vault. Picture its dark, heavy mass resting in the open, uncurled palm of your mind, its blunt edges catching the dim silver light of the single candle flame. That iron weight represents every unvoiced ache, every fear of an uncertain connection, and every rigid demand for absolute self-reliance you have been carrying since your youth. That heavy tool is the exact shape of your current emotional fatigue. It is the physical manifestation of your mind, trying to maintain absolute, punishing alignment through sheer willpower alone, separate from the ground. If it feels safe, try letting that iron plumb bob drop completely in your mind's eye, picturing it slipping from your fingers and setting down into the solid bedrock with a low final click. There is no need to rush this image, and nothing needs to change instantly within your body right now. Just observe what happens when the long, tense line of the flaxen string is allowed to go completely slack, sagging down into a soft, unweighted heap that requires no effort to hold straight. As that tension leaves your frame, imagine the wide, dark limestone cave within your abdomen beginning to open and expand. Watch the narrow, fragile pillars of your defensive thoughts begin to widen out and slow down, merging into the vast, protective walls of a cavern that requires no effort to contain its shape. With every breath you take, feel that identical softening taking place behind your shoulder blades, down through your spine, and into your legs. The rigid, frozen molds of your ancient isolations are losing their form, spreading out into a much wider, more supportive landscape of simple presence. The mind does not need to change its history, and you do not need to dissolve your boundaries to find peace tonight. Your presence simply glides there, a quiet, unweighted awareness that makes a low, soothing rhythm as it moves through the open stone spaces. You can let that imagery change now, allowing the subterranean vault and the iron weight to dissolve back into the dark background of your mind, leaving only the steady, spacious sensation of your own breathing body. There is absolutely no pressure on you to achieve total emotional clarity or a sudden transformation tonight. Healing is a gradual uncoiling of old, internal bracing patterns, not a violent event that happens in a single hour. You are fully permitted to carry a small amount of residual loneliness in the background, without needing to analyze it or judge it as a mistake. Just remaining aware of the weight you have been carrying is a profound act of self-preservation. Perhaps you can feel the heavy weight of your hips sinking deeper into the mattress, letting gravity perform the work of holding you steady without your personal effort. Your hands can remain open, completely empty of tools, fully excused from the work of building a permanent barrier against the world. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of the present moment. Where the room is safe, the stillness has settled, and the night is slowly unfolding its quiet architecture around your bed. Whenever you are ready, you can simply let your attention rest on the natural boundary, where your breath meets the cool air of the room. You have maintained the tension for many long miles, and you have guarded the tower with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. Now the iron weight is dropped, the foundation has found its natural relaxation in the dark, and you are fully permitted to exist without a single connection attached to your name. 2 weeks after the collapse of the isolated granite tower, a profound, frosty silence settled into the lower foundations of the subterranean chamber, locking the cavern in a cool, dark stillness. The broken shards of his previous project still lay scattered across the wet gravel floor, untouched and unpolished, serving as a stark reminder of his failed self-reliance. Ryun spent his morning sitting beside the ruin, his fingers cold, his throat tight with a lingering, heavy resentment. He had refused to join the other monks for their morning meals in the upper hall, treating their distant laughter as a personal rejection that proved his permanent exclusion from the circle. He spent hours tracing the edges of the broken granite with his sandal, completely trapped in the belief that his isolation was an unchangeable truth about his nature. On this quiet morning, Master Kanto did not ask Rin to clear away the broken rubble, and he did not order him to begin stacking a new pillar. Instead, the elderly wallmason placed a flat piece of unrefined charcoal into Rin's hand, its dusty black surface rough against his skin. Kanto quietly requested that Rin descend into the lowest basin of the vault, where a slow, steady trickle of mineral water fell from a mossy overhang, and use the charcoal to mark the exact water line on a semi-submerged granite block. When Rin heard this request, a sharp surge of frustration tightened his chest, his jaw clenching with an immediate, defensive reluctance. He felt that engaging with the cavern's natural features was an admission of total defeat, a submission to a lonely exile that he had not chosen. He stood at the edge of the dark pool, the flat piece of charcoal gripped tightly in his fingers, his mind spinning a fast web of arguments to justify running away from the task. He felt a strong urge to climb the stone spiral staircase, leave the temple altogether, and escape into the valley below, preferring the cold comfort of his anger over the vulnerability of staying in the dark vault. He looked down at the subterranean water, expecting to find Master Kanto observing his hesitation with a critical eye. But the old wallmason was already kneeling across the chamber, his attention entirely fixed on a seam of wet clay. Kanto's presence remained completely still and unbothered, carrying the immense passive weight of the bedrock that required no validation from the outside world. Ryun closed his eyes and paused for a single, slow breath, intentionally choosing to sit with the dizzying ring of isolation, rather than allowing it to drive him out of the room. He noted the cold tightness gathering along the sides of his throat, recognizing that his defensive panic was not an absolute fact about his unworthiness, but a familiar armor he used to protect his sensitive heart. He stepped onto the wet stone ledge of the basin, lowered his arm into the cool mineral pool, and pressed the flat charcoal against the side of the submerged granite block. He drew a single, steady horizontal line, right where the dark water met the rock, feeling the crisp chill of the liquid rising through his wrist. With each quiet stroke of the charcoal, Ron listened to the slow, rhythmic drop of water hitting the surface of the pool, a low sound that echoed softly through the vast limestone vault. He worked with a slow, deliberate discipline that sought no immediate rescue from the silence, simply marking the boundary of the water step by step in the cool morning air. As he finished his mark and stared at the dark line, a sudden, quiet realization filtered through the hollow ache inside his chest. He noticed that the water in the basin did not rise or fall based on his emotional state, and it did not struggle to maintain a separate identity from the rest of the mountain. Looking closely at the dark pool, he saw that this hidden basin was not an isolated fragment trapped in a dungeon, but connected through deep, invisible stone veins to the great mountain lakes and the valley rivers below. The water that felt so lonely and confined in the darkness was part of a single unbroken system that moved silently beneath the entire province, nourishing every field and forest without ever needing a formal invitation. The vast cavern network was not a prison cell that cut him off from humanity, but the very womb that held the shared waters of their existence. His isolation was not a permanent defect in his character, but a temporary wall he had built by treating every defensive thought as an absolute truth. He did not instantly transform into a perfectly expressive companion, and the painful memory of past rejections did not magically vanish from his heart. But a subtle, permanent shift altered his relationship with his own suffering. He looked down at his charcoal-stained fingers, no longer seeing his retreat as a permanent exile, but as a simple, necessary pause to let his true foundation widen into the dark earth. He carefully laid the piece of charcoal on a dry limestone shelf, washed his hands in the cool mineral basin, and sat down at the edge of the water without a single monument left to build in his mind. When we look deeper into the architecture of our own exhaustion, we begin to discover the hidden gears that keep our suffering in motion. We live under the constant illusion that if we hold ourselves rigidly enough, we can somehow dictate the behavior of the world around us. We use our analytical minds to rehearse future scripts, to replay old conversations with bitter regret, and to construct elaborate defenses against scenarios that may never come to pass. This constant internal labor is driven by an underlying terror of the unknown, a belief that an unexpected shift in our reality will completely destroy our foundation. We treat our internal space as a battlefield where every single uninvited thought must be subdued, and where every flash of anxiety must be instantly corrected through internal scolding. This mental pattern is exactly how we convert a passing moment of vulnerability into a permanent, heavy identity of exile. We take the raw, natural discomfort of being a human being in an unpredictable world, and we immediately wrap it in layers of profound self-judgment. We tell ourselves that if we were truly wise, or if we were spiritually mature, our minds would be as silent as a desert night. We try to repair our fragile sense of peace by using shame as a tool, wrapping our consciousness in a tight grip of constant correction. In doing so, we become completely trapped in our own defense mechanisms, mistaking the frantic ticking of our protective thoughts for the truth of who we actually are. The ancient insights of the Buddha provide a beautiful, liberating distinction that can help your tired mind find its true center tonight. There is a fundamental difference between the natural friction that life introduces to our path and the immense weight of suffering that our resistance adds afterward. The basic unexpected events of our existence, like the sudden cold moisture that seeps through a hidden crack in a limestone ceiling, are simply a part of living. They arrive without our permission, shaking our stability for a temporary moment, but they do not possess the power to break our deepest spirit. The agony begins when we refuse to let the day unfold naturally, when we spend our precious energy trying to force an unpredictable reality into a rigid box. Imagine a deep underground vault where a heavy hand-woven rope is used to suspend a large bronze oil lamp from a high timber rafter. If a sudden tremor shakes the mountain, the initial shock is just a single, passing vibration that travels through the hemp fibers. This represents the basic pain that life brings. But if the keeper panics at the swinging motion and grabs the rough rope with an intense, frantic fury to lock it into absolute immobility anyway, his palms will blister and tear under the friction of the natural weight. The presence of the tremor was an accident of the earth, but the desperate demand that the lamp must never sway from its center is what creates the injury. This is exactly how our hypervigilance operates within our chest. The original transition is unexpected, but our immediate, urgent need to override it through shame is what creates the suffocating tightness that keeps us awake at night. True serenity does not require you to live a life where the mountain never shakes, or where your mind never experiences a single ripple of fear. That is an unachievable ideal, a decorative mirage that only forces you to grind your internal spirit tighter out of frustration. True freedom arrives when you alter your entire relationship with that initial vulnerability, recognizing that you can allow the texture of the moment to exist without turning it into a personal failure. You can notice the sudden surge of an isolating thought. You can feel the old expectation rising in your throat, and you can simply let that energy move through your space without treating it as an absolute emergency. You are no longer trying to force your life to look like a permanent stone monument, for you are learning to trust the raw, uncarved nature that anchors you underneath the noise. When you step off the treadmill of constant self-fixation, you discover that you do not need to use shame to manage your internal world. Your fear of entering an unfamiliar landscape is not an enemy to be conquered, but an overstimulated guardian that simply needs to be shown the quiet water waiting in the basin below. By allowing your awareness to drop down into that lower, settled space, you give the old ancestral bracing permission to naturally disperse. You stop interpreting your tiredness as a personal defect, and you start seeing it as a temporary, moving part within a much larger, more spacious architecture. The world may continue to hold high expectations for a little while longer, but the core of your being remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. This internal exile does not only manifest within a hidden cavern network during a freezing midnight thaw. It mirrors itself continuously in the quiet, contemporary landscapes of your everyday routine. You experience this rigid isolation every time you glance down at your phone, watching a blank notification screen, waiting for an answer that does not arrive, feeling the muscles along your neck tighten as the digital silence grows louder. It happens when you lie perfectly still at midnight, replaying a minor misstep from an earlier conversation, turning the key of your self-criticism until your throat feels hollow with regret. You feel it when you look at the seemingly seamless connections of your peers online, concluding that your own quiet, guarded life is a definitive failure. We carry an immense amount of unvoiced pressure while moving through our modern schedules, offering a smooth, polite smile to our companions, while our internal space is vibrating with the fear of being exposed as inadequate. We try to micromanage the emotional climate of our relationships, hoping that if we can just control every external variable, we can prevent our hearts from being fractured. We look to our devices for a brief hit of reassurance, trying to use a glass screen to patch over a somatic tremor that actually requires deep, uncarved space. When we finally do give ourselves permission to sit down or close our eyes, a fierce wave of historical guilt instantly arises, whispering that stillness is a luxury we have not yet produced enough success to deserve. Bringing this ancient, underground mineral pool wisdom into your daily reality means discovering how to introduce a small pause before you allow an old reaction to claim your body. It means that when a sudden panic tells you to over-prepare for a routine interaction, you stop for the duration of a single, unhurried breath. You do not try to crush the protective impulse, and you do not scold yourself for feeling separate. You simply observe the frantic energy rising behind your ribs, recognizing it as an old, inherited script trying to dictate your current posture. By giving that pattern a moment of open visibility, you choose not to obey its rigid command, allowing the churning sediment to settle before it can warp your entire evening. You can care intensely about your commitments, your loved ones, and your future without pressing your fingers so tightly against your boundaries that your mind turns to absolute ice. True alignment is practicing the art of moving through your duties with a loose, flexible grip, understanding that you can offer your presence without needing to guarantee a perfectly static outcome. When you feel the familiar urge to perform arising, you can remember the raw, unpolished limestone basin that holds its water beautifully precisely because it connects to the entire earth. You can allow your awareness to drop below the internal commentary of your critics, anchoring yourself in the solid, unembellished center of your own immediate reality. You do not need to check a single box or fulfill a single expectation to qualify for a period of absolute non-doing tonight. Rest is not a decorative prize reserved for the flawless achiever, but the very cavern of clear water that keeps your internal slate clean and resilient over the years. When you let your limbs sink into the bed without demanding a blueprint for next week, you are letting the heavy stone monument of your reputation drop completely into the dark ground. You are allowing the micro-components of your consciousness to find their natural clearance, not by forcing them to look perfect, but by trusting the vast, unwritten space that naturally exists when the old tool is set down. This subtle shift in your daily rhythm does not mean your life will suddenly become free of challenging conversations, unexpected delays, or real human weight. The world will continue to present you with unpredictable seasons, complicated dynamics, and moments of profound uncertainty. But you will no longer meet those moments by locking your joints into a state of brittle compliance. You will discover that you can stand in the middle of a demanding week with a soft, spacious heart, moving through your hours with a measured, unhurried gait. You are slowly learning to exist as the wide, raw vault within which the silence is guided, fully anchored by an internal peace that needs no external validation to authorize its existence. The quiet, pitch-black cavern chamber is fading now into the complete, dark stillness of the midnight hour. Deep within the mountain foundations, the cool subterranean air has settled into an absolute equilibrium, absorbing the tiny echoes of the slow mineral drops until the vault feels entirely soft, insulated, and silent. The small granite pool has reached its perfect level, its dark surface unmoving, holding the water in a flawless mirror that requires no external light to find its peace. The hand-forged iron plumb bob rests completely still on the gravel floor, its flaxen string entirely slack, having finished its long labor of measuring separation. The flat stick of unrefined charcoal lies quiet on the dry limestone shelf, its dark dust settled, carrying no more markings across the stones. There are no more towers to align, no more broken fragments to evaluate, and no more defensive walls to build before the world above begins its morning routine. Your physical form is becoming incredibly heavy, sinking down into the supportive expanse of your bedding, like clear mineral water, losing its tiny ripples and settling perfectly flat into a deep stone chalice. Let the sensitive muscles behind your earlobes and along the sides of your throat unhook completely, releasing the hidden, ancestral tightness that kept your frame locked in a defensive stance through the demanding hours of the day. Your limbs rest slack and empty of momentum, abandoning the old, frantic habit of proving your self-sufficiency to a world that feels too distant to trust. Your shoulders are perfectly soft, your spine widening against the mattress, fully excused from the lifelong labor of carrying your entire emotional weight through sheer willpower alone. Your breathing has slowed to a faint, effortless rhythm, a quiet movement that matches the deep, timeless cooling of the limestone vaults hidden far beneath the mountain roots. Each quiet inhalation is a soft arrival in a sanctuary where nothing is being forced, and each quiet exhalation is the slow, smooth leveling of the internal spaces that kept your spirit tightly bound. You are no longer measuring your social worth. You are no longer replaying your past misunderstandings, and you are no longer checking your mind to see if you have discovered a perfect way to belong. The entire theater of your isolation has dissolved into the shadows, leaving you completely nameless, unmeasured, and free within the deep dark. The deep wisdom of the connected basin is drifting quietly into the center of your heart, bypassing your analytical thoughts entirely. You are absorbing the profound comfort of the subterranean waters, realizing that your true essence was never the narrow, isolated pillar you were trying so hard to construct through your panic. You are letting the hidden, silent veins of your existence simply move through the darkness, dropping down beneath the memory of your exclusions into the immense womb of the earth. You have absolute permission to stop solving your life for tonight, for there are no boundaries to repair in this quiet room, and no expectations waiting to be fulfilled before your eyes are allowed to close. The world can continue its complex, demanding choreography when the sun returns. But your inner cavern remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. You are allowed to slip away into the unwritten dark that remains when the heavy armor of your hyper-independence is left on the stone floorboards. The sediment has settled completely at the bottom of the pool. The water is flat, and the vast, protective architecture of the night is fully prepared to shelter your sleep without requiring a single social script in return. Let the final lines of your exile soften until they blend into the quiet, cool stillness of the slate. What if the vast space you feared as an empty desert was actually the very ground that was holding you close to every other silent heart all along? The mind may hesitate at the edge of this vast, dark vault, unaccustomed to an atmosphere where no social bridges are required and no metrics of belonging are being enforced. For so many years, the habit of vigilant self-protection has been your constant companion, a quiet, defensive coordinator whispering that any moment of unprotected rest was a dangerous vulnerability. You believed that if you did not constantly reinforce the thickness of the glass wall around your heart, the entire structure of your life would be crushed or exposed to unpardonable judgment. Yet, as you lie here in the deep, unmeasured stillness of the room, the cool air continues to deaden the old, frantic rhythms of expectation. You are beginning to see that the constant tightening of your armor did not protect your sensitive spirit. It only made your shoulders too rigid to feel the natural, supportive gravity of the earth when the terrain began to widen on its own. Let your awareness sink another layer into the absolute stillness of your immediate surroundings, allowing the physical weight of your chest to expand and settle without a single effort. There is a profound, instinctual intelligence in your muscles that knows exactly how to unravel when the analytical mind drops its heavy iron plumb bob and steps away from the ruined tower. This internal softening does not require you to master a hidden technique. It does not demand a sudden breakthrough of social confidence, and it certainly does not ask you to erase the memory of past rejections. It simply invites you to leave the water flat in the basin, to stop running your fingers over the rough edges of yesterday's misunderstandings, and to let the raw, uncarved surface of your presence just be, even if a faint whisper of unfinished conversations continues to hover in the background of your thoughts. You can simply let it drift like a stray molecule of damp limestone mist, completely harmless, completely distant, finding its own quiet baseline in the dark. Think of how the quiet subterranean chamber appears when the heavy oaken door above has been barred for the night, and the last ember in the monastery courtyard has turned to a silent flake of gray ash. The great slate walls and the deep granite basins do not vanish into the gloom, but their sharp, demanding outlines soften into the vast protective shadow of the mountain roots. The vault is still completely intact, perfectly capable of filtering the slow mineral drops and guiding the deep veins when the new season arrives. But right now it has absolutely nothing to prove to the silence. It does not need to justify its existence by participating in a constant stream of expressive interactions. It simply rests, anchored by the heavy, unchanging gravity of the bedrock beneath the stone floor, entirely content to let the cool darkness move through the fissures without a single ounce of resistance. You are fully permitted to inhabit that same unbothered stillness tonight, letting the urgent outlines of your modern schedule soften and fade into the cool, dark air around your bed. The messages that remain unanswered, the relationships that still look completely unfinished, and the personal milestones that seem to be moving much slower than the lives of those around you, do not need to be resolved before your eyes can close. They can remain precisely as they are, rough, incomplete, and uncertain, resting safely in the wide, patient custody of the unknown, while your tired spirit drops far beneath the surface of the day's evaluations. True peace is not a destination where every single line of your history has been perfectly straightened, and every companion has understood you with absolute precision. It is the profound, liberating capacity to lay your head down right in the middle of the unmapped design, letting your palms uncurl and your breath go loose while the world continues its unpredictable turning in the dark. With each quiet breath that travels through your frame, feel the wide, concentric rings of your awareness opening up even further, creating spacious chambers where no friction can take place. The air moves through your body easily, a neutral and unhurried traveler that reminds you of the native resilience that has always lived beneath your defensive armor. You are returning home to a version of yourself that existed long before you were taught that you had to be flawlessly self-sufficient to be worthy of safety and respect. You are returning to the clear, open consciousness that simply observes the passage of the hours without ever being diminished or defined by the isolations that fell across the page. You are the vast, solid mountain, not the transient wind that shakes the pine needles. You are the deep, dark sea of the night, not the small clouds that pass across its face. Let the total weight of your frame sink deeper into the support of the bed, letting go of the subtle, invisible bracing that lives behind your eyes and around the corners of your jaw. There are no horizons to scan in this quiet room, no sudden rejections to fend against, and no hidden flaws to repair within the steady, comforting silence of the house. Your long afternoon of loyal guarding has reached its natural boundaries, and the winter night has arrived to take over the watch, wrapping your entire life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. You do not need to carry the weight of tomorrow's performance before the morning light arrives to guide your fingers. For now, the iron tool is cold, the charcoal is dry, and you are fully allowed to dissolve into the spacious, timeless dark that has been waiting all along to receive your weary heart. The silence continues to deepen, spreading outward from your chest like clean mineral water moving across a smooth piece of slate, untying the remaining fibers of your day until they are completely loose and transparent. There is no longer any column to align, no reputation to maintain, and no historical script that requires your continuous presence. Every element of your awareness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of non-resistance where the boundaries of your identity feel beautifully soft, open, and light. You are drifting now in the vast, unmeasured current of the night, fully supported by the steady ground, entirely free from the obligation to be anything at all. The workspace is dark, the basin is quiet, and your heart is fully permitted to let go of the pattern, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. This welcoming home is not a fleeting refuge that you must constantly defend against the onset of tomorrow, nor is it a conditional harbor that can be taken away when the social landscape shifts around you once more. It is the vast original baseline of your entire being, a deep and unblemished sanctuary that remains completely untroubled by the temporary waves of connection and disconnection that pass across the surface of the world. As the physical weight of your body presses deep into the mattress, imagine the last microscopic particles of fine limestone dust within that subterranean pool slowly losing their momentum, drifting downward through the cool, clear water until they rest perfectly flat against the granite bedrock. The internal turbulence has completely spent its force, leaving the liquid surface so smooth and undisturbed that it becomes a perfect, dark mirror for the immense silence of the mountain ceiling. You are no longer required to filter the pool. You are no longer required to measure the waterline, and you can allow the heavy sediment of your daily isolation to sink completely out of sight. The mind often struggles to conceptualize a sense of true safety that does not rely on absolute self-reliance, believing that if it lets down its guard for even a single evening, it will be left entirely stranded in a cold, empty vacuum. We treat our internal environment as a fragile tower that must be constantly braced against the movements of those around us, building elaborate mental walls out of our anxieties to insulate our sensitive spirits from the risk of being misunderstood. But look closely at the true architecture of this winter night, where the dense stillness softens the borders of every separate structure, showing us that our deepest resilience does not live in our capacity to stand alone in the dark. True strength is found in the quiet, supportive capacity of the underlying earth to hold every mountain peak in a single, continuous embrace, proving that the space between us is not a lonely void, but the very ground that connects us all. You do not need to perfect a narrow column of independence to be secure tonight, for the very emptiness that felt so intimidating during the day is the exact space where your soul is learning to widen its foundation. Let the comforting, heavy density of this understanding settle deep into your physical core, warming the spaces between your shoulder blades and smoothing out the long muscles of your lower back. Your body does not need to stay on high alert to protect your social position, and your mind does not need to resolve a single interpersonal conflict before your awareness is permitted to dissolve into the dark. Every incoming breath is a gentle reminder that you are entirely separate from the frantic commentary of your protective thoughts, a spacious and silent sky that merely observes the passing weather without ever being diminished by the storm. Every outgoing breath is a quiet invitation to let the remaining layers of your defensive identity drop onto the floorboards, leaving you entirely light, nameless, and untethered as you drift further away from the waking shore. Think of how the quiet, mineral-rich water rests deep within the subterranean fissures during these late hours, completely unconcerned with the grand interactions of the surface world or the previous shape of the shattered granite blocks. The deep pool does not hurry its movement to meet an artificial deadline of belonging, and it does not carry a sense of personal failure because it resides far beneath the bright courtyards of the sun. It simply exists in a state of perfect, organic suchness, absorbing the quiet stability of the mountain roots, trusting the slow and silent laws of nature to maintain its equilibrium without a single drop of human effort. You can allow your own inner landscape to rest in that same patient custody tonight, letting go of the exhausting demand to prove your self-sufficiency to those who cannot see your heart. The invisible veins of the earth have placed you precisely where your spirit needs to open, and you can trust the vast, dark cradle of the night to hold you steady without a single ounce of your personal manipulation. The silence of your room continues to expand, a deep and velvet darkness that softens the sharp angles of your modern responsibilities until they lose their demanding form completely. The digital world has turned off its lights. The voices of comparison have retreated into the fog, and there is not a single critic standing over your bed to measure the efficiency of your resting hours. You are fully permitted to be completely unproductive tonight, to let the unfinished relationships sit in the shadows like uncarved stones, entirely free from the obligation to repair your life before the morning light returns. You are entering a sacred sanctuary of non-doing, a boundless realm where your worth is an absolute and unchanging truth that requires no masterpieces, no flawless social circles, and no external approval to validate its existence. With every slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, feel yourself sinking deeper into the vast undercurrent of the evening, letting the heavy gravity of the bed take the full physical burden of your journey. Your hands are perfectly loose, your fingers are uncurled, and the long lines of tension that lived behind your knees have completely dissolved into a smooth, comforting warmth that spreads through your entire frame. You are no longer replaying the misunderstandings of the previous season. You are no longer rehearsing the defensive scripts of tomorrow, and you are no longer trying to force the river of time to change its direction. You are simply the deep, quiet basin within which the water has found its perfect equilibrium, an unchanging mirror of peace that reflects nothing but the immense protective shadow of the night. The remaining imagery of the subterranean vault and the stone cutter begins to melt into the soft, dark background of your awareness, leaving only the steady, soothing sound of your own breathing body. The iron plumb bob is motionless. The charcoal mark is dry. The black clay has found its rest at the bottom of the pool, and the entire mountain has surrendered to the silent density of the earth. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to control, and no old territory left to mourn within the wide, patient safety of this room. You are fully permitted to let go of the map, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady leveling of the stream as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep. Let your mind float out into that wide, transparent dark, where the boundaries of your anxiety become completely weightless, dissolving like a drop of clear water falling into a silent mountain lake. You have stood on the crumbling bank for many long miles, and you have fought the current with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. But now the stone is dropped, the channels are open, and the night has arrived to wash away the last traces of your fatigue. You are returning to the primitive, uncarved center of your being, a deep well of tranquility that has never been touched by the disruptions of the outer world. The workspace is completely dark, the waters are perfectly flat, and you are fully allowed to exist without a single boundary attached to your name, resting heavily in an ancient, unbroken peace that needs no explanation to authorize its rest, as the last echoes of the waking world fade into the absolute quiet of the midnight hour. The entire universe seems to draw a single, collective breath of total surrender, wrapping your life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. The future can wait in the fog until the sun returns to guide your fingers, for right now there are no channels to dig, no roles to maintain, and no historical scripts that require your continuous presence. Every element of your consciousness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of pure non-resistance where you are completely free to dissolve into the spacious dark. The mountain is still, the stream is level, and your heart is fully permitted to drop beneath the surface of the day, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. The deep, dreamless rest expands even further, expanding the hidden spaces of your consciousness until every remaining thread of tension is entirely unraveled by the heavy quiet of the room. You are sinking past the layer of memories, past the unfinished blueprints of your daily work, and past the persistent urge to evaluate how well you are adapting to this quiet chapter of your existence. The analytical mind has finally run out of arguments, choosing to abandon its long post at the watchtower, recognizing that it no longer needs to defend a fort that was never truly in danger of collapsing. You are letting your entire identity drop down into the cool, silent depths of the present moment, allowing the unfamiliar contours of your reality to just exist without requiring a single explanation from the dark. Let the heavy, soothing warmth of this total non-resistance travel up through the base of your skull, releasing the tiny, subconscious bracing patterns that gather when you are trying to force your thoughts into a rigid alignment. Your eyes are completely soft behind their lids. Your breathing has slowed to a long, rhythmic glide, and the invisible weight that lived behind your collarbones has completely flattened into a loose, unhurried wave of pure presence. There are no sudden transformations waiting to surprise you in the corners of this space, and no invisible judges are standing over your bed to measure the speed of your emotional recovery. You have crossed the threshold into an ancient, timeless domain where your only task is to let the mattress take the absolute physical burden of your frame, letting gravity carry you forward while the world continues its slow, unmapped turning in the shadows. Think of how the vast bedrock beneath the mountain terrace feels during these quiet midnight hours, when the cold rain has ceased and the heavy mist has completely swallowed the outlines of the stone walls. The solid stone does not shift its placement because the surface mud moved during the storm, and it does not carry a sense of panic because the old irrigation ditches are filled with silt. It simply remains exactly where it has always been. An immovable, foundational presence that accepts the changing weight of the seasons without a single ripple of internal friction. You can allow your deepest nature to match that same undisturbed stability tonight, letting the dark blanket of the evening mute the lingering echoes of your daytime anxieties until your mind is as quiet and unbothered as the deep mountain granite. The ancient understanding that true peace is found not in removing the current, but in changing your relationship to its movement, is settling into the very marrow of your bones now, filling your body with a deep, comforting density that needs no validation from the past to authorize its rest. You are finally realizing that the integrity of your journey does not depend on keeping your life perfectly static, but on your willingness to stop treating an unexpected shift as a personal catastrophe. By letting the stream find its new level without throwing a single wall in its path, you have dismantled the hidden machinery of your panic, allowing your true, uncarved center to rise softly to the surface. The unmapped roads and the missing answers can remain precisely where they fell, untied and unpolished, without casting a single shadow over your fundamental worth. Let the total darkness of the evening wrap itself around your awareness like a heavy, seamless garment that carries no seams and no restrictions. There is no longer any digital screen to check for reassurance, no old routine to rewrite in the theater of your imagination, and no comparison loop to run through your mind before your limbs are permitted to go completely slack. The world beyond your window pane may continue its complex, demanding movements, but within this quiet pocket of warmth, you are entirely exempt from the performance. You are the wide, open sky within which the storm has finally run its course, a vast, unchanging backdrop that remains perfectly serene and whole whether the clouds are heavy or light. With every slow, quiet breath that slides past your lips, feel yourself drifting further away from the rigid names and definitions that kept your identity bound to the wheel of constant productivity. Your hands are perfectly open, your wrists are completely loose, and the long, tense lines of anxiety inside your forearms have dissolved into a smooth liquid comfort that pulls you down into the deep velvet of the midnight hour. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of your own baseline existence, a deep, primitive sanctuary that has never been scratched or diminished by the evaluations of others or the sudden blockages of your creative journey. The night has opened its most silent, timeless chambers to receive your weariness, offering you a place where you can exist without a single goal left to justify your place on this quiet earth. As the final, faint images of the subterranean vault and the elderly wall mason dissolve into the deep, dark current of your resting mind, the entire world outside seems to draw a single, collective breath of absolute surrender. The iron tools are cold, the flaxen string is loose, The black charcoal has settled completely in its stone basin, and the entire landscape has found its perfect equilibrium under the silent night. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to fix, and no masterpiece left to prove your right to inhabit this spacious dark. You are fully permitted to let go of the tapestry, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady rhythm of the night as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep.